All right, welcome everybody who's flying in as our flock is gathering for this birding for babies and toddlers webinar. We invite you to share where are you flying in from today? And our special question of the morning or this afternoon is, what is the bird you most remember from childhood? The first bird you remember, one that stands out in your mind. We'd love to hear about it. So type in the chat where you're flying in from and the bird you most remember from childhood. Okay. And we're just gonna give folks a few minutes to arrive before we begin. Seeing robins and blue jays, red-winged blackbirds, redbirds.
Oregon, blue jay.
That's probably mine too.
Oh,
that was mine too.
Really?
Yeah, that's cool.
Because they're
oh
so
my goodness, so many great places and birds.
Yeah. For folks just arriving, we are inviting you to share where you're flying in from today as our flock is gathering, and the first or the bird that you remember most from childhood.
Mockingbirds, yes. Hi, Deborah. Caitlin Williams is with us.
Caitlin!
A prolific birder.
Red robin, I'm seeing. Seeing robins coming in, robins.
Lots of robins.
You might not even know which bird it was. Maybe you just remember like a flash of a color or a shape. Yeah. Whether it was a songbird or a raptor. Oh yeah, nice.
You know, I recently a couple of years ago, I finally made it over to the UK and discovered that robins are very different. They're much smaller there, and they're a very different bird in the UK.
They are, indeed.
Yeah. Red-winged blackbird. I have a fun story about those.
I hope you'll tell that story. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I think I should. Well, I will be talking about Kira, that daughter, today, so maybe I will. Wow, so many places. This is really amazing. How exciting. And it just fills my heart. There's so many people who love birds.
So today's webinar, if you are really excited to share the joy of birding with the babies and the toddlers and the tiny people in your life, we are so happy to have you here today because early childhood is the perfect time to spark a lifetime of birding. And so today's Birding for Babies and Toddlers webinar with special guests Kathleen Lockyer and Meg Barrow is a really amazing opportunity to get into like not just why do we love to be sharing the love of birding with our little people, but why also it's so important for their health and development. And again, I'm Molly Songs with Audubon, California. So happy to be here with you all today. In this webinar today, we're going to discover steps that we can take right away to engage the little ones in birding, to strengthen their connection to nature and support healthy development. And Kathleen is the founder of RX Outside, and Meg is a certified advanced practitioner with RX Outside's NatureLed approach. You're both occupational therapist practitioners who specialize in nature connection and birding as a pathway for children's health and development. We're so lucky and honored to be with you today and your expertise and your lifetime of experience, and we're really excited to learn from you. So without further ado, Kathleen, will you kick us off?
Sure. I'd just first like to say thank you, Molly, for organizing this webinar today and for just being the person that you are in bringing the understanding and the beauty and the magic and everything about birds to the world and to California Audubon, and gratitude to California Audubon for hosting this webinar. And I'd like to thank Meg, my co-host today, for joining us. It's really exciting that Meg and I work together and we teach together. And one of the most fun things about that is that I have children who are grown, and on one end of the spectrum of introducing your young children to birds, and Meg is just starting out her parenting journey with very young children. So we get to kind of look at the whole spectrum and bring stories of the spectrum to our audiences. And so that's a really fun thing. So I'm grateful to Meg and Audubon and for all of you who are here today. And I just feel so excited to see the numbers of people who registered and who love the birds like we do. And I want to first just acknowledge that if you're here, clearly you have a love and a care for the bird world. And so you're already doing such good things for the young people just by being excited about the birds and sharing that excitement with whatever you do, whether you're just standing on a sidewalk looking at birds and kids are walking by, or you're a parent or a grandparent and you actively share that love with the children. It's today we hope that you will see that birding isn't just a nice to have and a nice little addition to do with kids. It's actually necessary for the full potential of their growth. So we hope that you'll be inspired by that today. And so with that, I'd like to just share that, yes, as Molly said, I'm the founder of RX Outside. I also co-founded a nonprofit in the year 2003 when my children were young. My youngest daughter was 2 at the time, and so she became the youngest birder and nature connection specialist in our program. And she's now 21. My older daughter is 24. And that is my favorite role in life, is parent to my daughters, Veda and Kira, and to my bonus daughter, Amber, and my grandbaby. And I hope they're here today, but grandbaby may be sleeping. So, so yes, I co-founded a nonprofit. They are still in existence and still running programs introducing the children of our county to birds and many other aspects of nature. I've also worked with international wildlife trackers, and Caitlin Williams is on here today. She is one of those people that I've worked with and continue to work with. And I've taught at professional conferences and public organizations and just kind of the whole gamut. I've also worked in the public sector, in public school, and I've brought the knowledge of therapeutic use of birding to teachers and to schools and to children who have what's called an IEP, who may need a little extra assistance in school or a lot of extra assistance, or they may be challenged by developmental deficits or developmental challenges. And I have actively used my relationship with birds and introduced and built relationships with birds between even children who were for all purposes considered nonverbal, and who I witnessed become more verbal through the bird world, through their built relationship with the birds. So I'm really excited to share all that with you today. And I'm going to share a little bit more about my journey to the bird world and introducing others to the therapeutic use and the developmental needs of our children and birds. But first, I would like to hand it over to Meg, my co-host. And I will also say that Meg was one of my first year students in my cohort, where I teach others who work with children about all of this. And Meg came years ago and she just never left. She just was so perfect. I told her she was never getting away. And so, Meg, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, you're never getting rid of me. I'm so grateful to be doing this work with you and to be learning from you. And yeah, I'll echo your gratitude to Molly and California Audubon. I'm just thrilled to join you in this conversation. And yeah, like Molly said, I'm also an occupational therapist. I started my career working in pediatrics, and I've always had a passion for supporting children to live to the point where they're thriving. And that led me to a place of reconnecting children to the natural world to support their development to the fullest. I also work with a deep nature connection group here in Madison called Wild Harvest Nature Connection. And I work with the youngest group, the 4 to 7 year olds. So I get to to drop in with the young ones around birds and bird language and all other aspects of deep nature connection. So I'm so grateful to do that work. And just gratitude also to Kathleen's mentorship, and a special shout out to Glenn Chisholm, Alex Britzius, and Heather Hutchinson, who are all huge mentors for me in terms of learning and loving the birds here in Madison, Wisconsin. So thanks to all of them. And back to you, Kathleen.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm going to share just a couple of personal stories because I feel like it really helps encapsulate the importance of attending to our non-human neighbors, the birds. And my journey to the bird world really began back when I was a child, and my earliest bird that I remember is a wren. I actually can't tell you what kind of wren because I was a very young child, and I was laying under the limbs of a weeping willow tree, and it was Hopewell Junction, New York, and I may have been 5 years old, and I would often fall asleep under that tree. And this one day I fell asleep under that tree, and it was a little wren who kind of poked its little beak in there and started chiming at me and woke me up. And I remember making eye contact with that wren and just feeling like it saw me. Like this little tiny bird saw me, this little person. And from then on, I called the birds my friends. And I would talk about birds, and my parents, the beauty in my childhood, there was a lot of chaos, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But there was a lot of chaos. But one of the things that my parents did that I know now was very unique with me was that they never teased me for my love of the birds. They gave me what I call, they were nature permissive parents. And what that means is they really gave me permission to love the birds and the natural world in exactly the way that I did. And that permission allowed me to develop the relationship with birds and to see them as my neighbors, as my human neighbors, as my non-human and human being the same. So that was a really beautiful thing that I was given as a child. And so then when my daughters were born, I just naturally did a lot of things that introduced them to birds without really understanding what I was doing until my daughter one day, really actually, let me back up a little bit. It was really the moment when Richard Louv, who some of you may know, he wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And several years ago, he was writing a new book, and it's called Our Wild Calling. Shout out to Richard Louv. And he asked me if I had any stories. I had the great honor of speaking with him in front of a few live audiences. And after that, he asked me if I had any stories about connecting with animals. And I said, I did have a story about my daughter connecting with animals and connecting with birds in particular. And Richard found that story so valuable that he began chapter 8 in his book, Our Wild Calling, with that story. And so the story is this. I had been through a divorce. I had moved across the country. I had reoriented my whole life and had a new job. And now I was a single parent raising 2 daughters on my own. And these are all the pieces that I actually didn't share with him because I didn't really think about the relevance at the time. But my daughter was sitting in the backyard, and she was about 7 years old at this time. And I was diligently working on paperwork for my job. And all of a sudden, she stopped what she was doing. She was sitting on the ground, and she had a mortar and pestle, and she was pounding acorns because we collect acorns every year and made acorn pancakes, one of their favorite things to do. So she was pounding these acorns, and all of a sudden she stopped pounding, and I heard her say, "Mama, what's he saying?" And I was like, who are you talking about? And she's like, him. And I listened for a minute and I didn't hear anybody. And we lived right next to a trail, a very active trailhead. And so I was thinking that maybe she heard people walking by and wanted to know what they were saying. And so I didn't hear anything. And in my busyness of mind, I just went back to my paperwork. And she started pounding again until again, she stopped. And she did this 3 times. And the 3rd time she stopped, I was like, honey, who are you talking about? And she stopped and she looked at me, and just as condescending as a 7-year-old can, she took that stone and she pointed behind her and she goes, him, mama, that guy, him, do you hear him? And I was like, what? And I listened for a moment, and all of a sudden I heard who he was. And he happened to be a California towhee. And the towhee was going, over and over and over again. The whole time this was happening in the background. And I had tuned it out completely because I was so busy in my mind. And when she said him, I got worried and fearful and, you know, all those things that happens to us adults when we're really busy and we start to get anxious. And so as I tuned in, I was like, oh, I had this huge relief go over me. And I was like, oh, now I know who you're talking about. And then she looks at me again and she goes, yeah, what's he saying? And I was like, oh yeah, the answer. And I said, I don't know, honey, let's go find out. And I shared this story with Richard Louv. And at one point in our exchanges, he said to me, but why birds? Because I had shared with him what I did with birds in the public schools and children. And he's like, but why birds? Now, I think Richard knew why birds, but he was kind of wanting my take on why birds. And so this webinar really began way back then, as did the book that I'm just finishing up writing called Birding for Babies and Toddlers, because it really took me an entire book to explain why birds are so incredibly important to the development and the rehabilitation of our neurological systems, starting with birth and before even, that it took me a whole book to explain that and all the nuances and the neurobiology and how it's been something that we have done since the beginning of time, was tuned in and listened to the birds. And there's some research that now shows and demonstrates that quite possibly bird sound, some people say bird language, but bird sound is quite possibly the first nuance of sound and understanding of communication that we as humans tuned into, and has such similarities to our music pieces, to some of our music pieces, that that they're really, the scientists, thank you scientists, by the way, another shout out and gratitude to all the scientists doing all the good work to really validate and show what I think we all know in our hearts, especially if we love birds, and certainly what the indigenous people of the world know and have always known and continue to know. For some reason, a lot of the world needs proof, but the indigenous folks never have needed proof because they have it, and so do we. So that is really what started this whole webinar. And then as I started diving into the why birds part and learning about the neurobiology, I really started to give name to all of the therapeutic ways I was helping children participate with the bird world and bird relationships, such as, you know, even just sound location in the environment. I was constantly hearing that children weren't paying attention in classrooms. And part of that is that I was discovering over and over again that children were having a hard time actively processing sound in their environment. Pulling one sound, a teacher's voice, out of a plethora of sounds in a classroom is a skill that is built from birth. So we come wired to interact with the world, but we have to actively engage in that wiring in order to develop it, our sensory processing systems. And so, so then as I've explored this over the last number of years, the more people I meet, especially if you are a birder, I've discovered that there are a lot of things that people already do that introduce their kids to birds. And Meg is a good example of that, because as I was asking Meg for stories for my book, I said, Meg, do you have any good stories of your kids, you know, your babies and toddlers and birds? And she's like, you know, none that really come to mind. And I've heard that a lot. And then I started asking Meg more questions and discovered that, in fact, Meg does a lot of things and has a never-ending list of bird stories. But they become so normal that you've forgotten how powerful and important they are. And you shared one with me recently, Meg, that it just filled my heart about Anna and what she did at preschool one day. Would you share that and tell us a little bit about what you see working with very young children and birds?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't say this earlier, but I have 2 daughters as well. And my daughter Anna's about to turn 5 at the end of August. And then my daughter Zoe is 2.5. And getting excited about birds with them is just one of the great joys of my life. And we are so fortunate to live in an extremely bird-rich environment. We live right in town in Madison, Wisconsin. And there's this great system of bike paths. So I bike them to their preschool. And the path we take hugs one of the lakes that is right in the middle of Madison. And then we turn off and follow this creek. And on our way to school one day, there were 2 sandhill cranes walking across the street. And the best thing about bike commuting is that it's so easy to stop and watch. And something I really learned from Kathleen is, like, you can always spare that 2 to 5 minutes to just pause with your kids, especially when they notice something and seem interested or excited. Like, that is the juiciest time to just drop in for a few minutes, and worth like pausing the to and fro of your transition. So anyway, we stopped and watched these 2 sandhill cranes crossing the road 1 block from their school. And as they crossed and went off into the tall prairie plants, we continued on to school. And when we got to the gate where Anna goes into their outdoor classroom, I was like, Anna, tell your teacher what you just saw. And she was like, oh, we just saw 2 sandhill cranes. And she walked like a sandhill crane into her classroom. And it was so awesome. She totally had it down. And as the OT in me is just like, I mean, not only is it incredible to get to see sandhill cranes in the middle of your neighborhood, also just thinking about all of the aspects of her development that were activated by that experience. Like, every single sensory system is firing and making connections and just building that body into something that's noticing, making connections, building relationships, and wanting to share that with others. So yeah, that was a really sweet moment.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that story. And I love that. And that's what when I talk about nature permissive parenting, or bird permissive parenting in this case, you know, that's what I'm talking about, is really giving kids permission to embody and to enjoy, because I've heard the opposite. And it's, you know, parents and grandparents, caregivers, they're, for the most part, always very well intentioned, but I think we forget sometimes with our language, and sometimes we don't give kids that permission to embody that. But I do want to jump into one really critical piece about, because someone was asking about how to introduce kids to birds, babies and toddlers to birds in particular. And so I just wanted to share one really critical element of development and how birds help us with that. And this really came to me when my first daughter was about 5 months old. And it didn't happen at first that I noticed with a bird, but it happened with another element of nature. And then it generalized to birds as we went on. And so she was about 5 months old, and she was born in the middle of winter in Connecticut. And I had, my whole life was reoriented because I found myself pregnant much earlier than I had imagined being pregnant. And so I was a relatively new graduate, and I had a rough go the first couple of months of being a mother. And although I was completely enamored of my baby, in fact, I had to force myself to go to sleep because I just loved looking at her. But I couldn't manage much else, even brushing my hair for the first 5 months. And I'm a voracious reader, especially with research and with science and human development. So I'd read and read and read and read books, and no book really resonated fully with me. And I was frustrated by that. And that's probably why I kept reading. But then this one day, she did something, and it was so quick, but so incredibly profound that I could have missed it because it was literally a split second. And it was from that moment that was my jump off moment into really understanding the nuance of the natural world and our development. And so this is what she did. We walked outside, I opened the door, and as she was on my hip, she was like a little cherub, and a gust of wind blew up, and it hit her in the face. And as it hit her in the face, she was just turning, and the wind touched her, and immediately she went like this with the wind. And I laughed because it looked so funny. And when I laughed, she turned and she looked at me. And when she looked at me, I smiled and laughed again. And then she turned back to the wind and she did it again. And then looked at me again. And this began this little dance, this cycle between my baby and the wind, and my baby and me. And it went back and forth over and over. And years later, I didn't know it then, but I know it now. I discovered through the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, they had coined a term called serve and return. And it is exactly the serve and return they talk about between a caregiver and a baby and an infant. And the baby, for example, does what my baby did. She looked at me and I looked back at her in a way of validation of what she's just engaged with. And that validation tells her brain, this is important, do it again. And so as she continued to engage with the wind, she continued to develop her tactile system, her sense of touch. And so I now talk about that serve and return a little bit differently than the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. I talk about it through our children's sensory systems, all of our sensory systems, and the natural world, that the natural world is always serving our children and our babies' sensory systems an invitation to engage and develop. And so my daughter, after that, I noticed that she started doing that with birds too. A bird would make a sound, she would look back to me, and I would smile and she would do it again. And I started noticing this happening over and over with every aspect of nature. And so as I shared this story for years, I've shared this story, I started getting more stories back from people who had heard it and tried similar things with their infants. Infants as young as 3 months old. My friend called me one day and she said, oh my gosh, I got it. And she was my friend, but she had her preschooler in our Nature Connection program. And she brought her infant with her when she was born. And she always came on the programs because she got so much out of the program herself. So this infant came along with us all the time with her preschooler. And she called me one day and she's like, I got it. I just did fly the baby. And I was like, fly the baby? What is fly the baby? And then she started describing this whole serve and return beautiful interaction between her. I can't remember. I think her baby was maybe 5-6 months old at the time. And she said that she would notice like her baby's arms would, do this thing from time to time when she went outside. And she hadn't really paid much attention to it until she had heard me talking and then brought the baby outside. and the baby did this thing with her hand. And so my friend thought, I'm going to just walk in the direction of that hand. And she walked in the direction of her baby's hand, and she ended up at a tree. And she thought, well, that's interesting. That could be coincidental. The baby did it again. She ended up at, they had a little barnyard with horses, and she ended up at the barnyard fence in front of the horse. Then she did it again, and she ended up following birds. This baby is now 17 years old. And from the time she was a young girl, we started calling her the bird whisperer. And she still has that nickname because she developed such a connection to birds. And my belief is that it was through her mother's nature permissive parenting and engagement with the birds and following her child's response to the serves by the birds that really helped her develop such a deep relationship with the birds. And it starts, again, so young. It starts at day one by all the little things that we do. It doesn't have to be a grand sweeping thing that we do with our babies and toddlers to introduce them to birds. It's 1,000 little things over weeks and months and years that we do, tiny moments. And Meg has 1,000 of these tiny moments. In fact, you shared with me recently an experience that your daughter, your younger daughter, who is how old is Zoe now?
She's 2.5.
2.5, helped you discover a bird you didn't know.
Yes, she did. Yeah, I just love that flying the baby story so much. Yeah, they're paying attention. They're paying attention to everything that's going on. And so the environments that we spend time in with our kids are what matter. And our presence with them matters, just watching them. And I love that story of that woman just being like, I'm just going to follow my kid's curiosity, because really that's what it is. It's about following your kid around sometimes and watching their eyes and watching their body and moving with them at their pace. And that will lead you to what it is that they're ready and curious to learn about. I think the other thing that they're watching is, what are we curious and interested in? What are we paying attention to? I didn't start really paying attention to birds until maybe the year before I had my older daughter, and my spouse, Rob, lovingly started nicknaming me Bird Dog, because we'd be on walks in the neighborhood and I would just like freeze and listen, trying to like, okay, I'm hearing a sound and trying to figure out where that bird is and who do they look like, and etc. And I think my kids have just been watching me do this. And so, yeah, I was walking into school with Zoe one morning, and there was this bird that I had never heard before. And it was like during, egg laying season. And first I heard the crow going off. And then I saw this other bird that was like moving between the top of 2 spruce trees out in front of Zoe's school. And I was like, who is that? I have never heard that sound. And of course I was like, those crows robbing the nests again. I was just so sure. So anyway, I took a video, and Zoe right away was trying to imitate the sound, and she could point out where this bird was. And then I feel so grateful that I have other bird nerds in my life. Shout out again to Glenn Chisholm, that I can text this video to and say, who is this? But yeah, it was just amazing to watch her totally tune in. Her ears found that bird, her eyes found that bird, and then her brain was taking in that sound and trying to replicate it with her own voice. And it's so cool to watch a kid whose own, like, her English language expression is really developing. And then so is her bird voice expression, all those skills about taking in sounds and then trying to replicate them and communicate. It's like the way that generalizes into the other forms of development that are happening. It's like such a juicy time. Yeah. And that's one of my favorite, talking about starting out with young kids. Most of the time, what I do is just sit and try to copy the bird sounds I'm hearing. And that actually is like a great source of comedy too.
Yeah.
But so yeah, a lot of the times it's just like my daughters and I trying to figure out like, how are we going to try to say what the bird is saying and starting there. And that's a lot of fun. It's fun to do with your adult friends too. A co-mentor of mine and I had a good belly laugh trying to imitate a Canadian goose with group one day. Yeah, we were all rolling. So
Yeah, and babies, like I said, babies as young as 3 months old can really make attempts to imitate sounds, especially the sounds of their caregivers, and have that little serve and return. And so now when you walk out the door, Zoe, if she hears that bird, she says what?
Well, Anna. So Anna was the one who was like, there's that Merlin again, because we walk in together. So it just totally has created this file card, and now she recognizes it.
She doesn't even have to see it, right? She hears it
from the sound. Yeah, absolutely. So it's just amazing to see the way that carries forward in the relationships they're building, just like they know the voice of a friend or the face of someone familiar. It's a whole nother set of friends that they get out in the world. Yeah.
Right. And it's more important, even though it's amazing that your young children know what a Merlin is and can recognize it by sound and the way it looks. It's actually more important that they resonate with what's happening in the bird canopy.
Yeah.
And that they're processing that as a whole experience, because again, sound is, our hearing is passive, but processing that what we hear is an active experience. Mm-hmm. And so by looking and discovering and being excited about a new sound in the environment, Meg helped her daughters really create a coherent and full picture of the sound and the sight and the experience that's happening. And that's the thing that helps our brains develop in an organized way, when sound and sight and multi-sensory experience all match up for a meaningful piece of information for our brain. And this is what our brains have done since the beginning of time. Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons I'm convinced that when we start doing this with young children, even if it's just my daughter in the bird story, and I have a couple more pieces to share about that story so people understand the relevance of it just in her life. But she used to, I just discovered this actually a couple of years ago. She didn't fully know the name of this bird because we always called it what she imitated. When she was a toddler, 2 years old, she would imitate red-winged blackbirds. And she would go, "Mama, it's the bopo-wee bird, bopo-wee." And so we just always called it the bopo-wee bird. And she thought that was the name of the bird until recently. She's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a red-winged blackbird." Because I asked her a question about red-winged blackbirds, and she's like, "I don't know if I know that bird." Bopo-wee bird? And she's like, "Oh." But already, regardless of knowing the actual name or not, she has a direct relationship with the red-winged blackbird from the time she was little. Yeah. And Meg, your children have that as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that about the naming of the birds, because I find this even myself as an aspiring bird nerd. It's exciting to get your bird ID down and to increase your bird ID. And the best thing that adults can do with kids is just be curious and be in awe and live in that moment of question and mystery and just share, like, this is something I value and I want to know about. Less important than the name that we've given that bird. And I love the practice with kids of like, well, I don't know, what would you name that bird if you could give it a name? You know, like just the relationship is what matters. And yeah, just that they're watching, that we value and are curious and are showing that it's important to pay attention to these birds because they matter. Yeah. Oh, did you see something, Kathleen?
Oh, somebody else said that their 1-year-old is doing bopo-wee.
Yes, I love that one.
I love it. Yeah. And so another piece of that story with my daughter, and I think that one of the reasons, and this is the last piece I'll say about this story, and then if people have questions, we'd love to answer questions today too. You can put them in the chat, and Molly's helping us keep track of some of those questions. But I know that Richard Louv put that story in his book because he understood the value of what was going on, even without knowing the backstory of my daughter. At that time in our lives, my daughter had been through some really challenging situations, and she was dealing with some trauma. And it reminded me of my own childhood. And this is the reason I'm so passionate about people having a relationship with birds, and children from early on in life being given or gifted what I feel like is their inheritance around their relationships with birds, because there's something called ACEs, and it's adverse childhood experiences. And the more ACEs you have as a child, the more likely you are as an adult to struggle in a variety of ways: mental health, physical health, heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, diabetes, addictions. I mean, it's amazing the science they've done around early childhood and adverse childhood experiences. I was a child who had a very high ACE score, and I should be in an N category that looks very different than my life does now. I have a beautiful life. I have joy. I spread joy. I am joy. And I know it's because of the birds, because a couple of years ago, some clever scientists were looking at this ACE study, adverse childhood experience study, and they said, but wait a minute, not everybody ends up in that end category. Why not? And they discovered that there is something called PACEs, protective and compensatory experiences of childhood, things that protect us from those adversities and help insulate us and build us with a deep connection. Those are my words, deep connection. And for me, the bird world and the natural world was my very primary PACE. It protected me, and it's helped me compensate regardless of what I've come up against in life. And my daughter was having the same experience at 7 years old. Not the same, thankfully she doesn't have as many ACEs as I did, but she had suffered some trauma. And at that moment in time, she would, not that day, but other days around the same time of our lives, she would be outside, and it looked like she wasn't doing anything in the backyard. And she would just be sitting there. And a couple of times I said, honey, what are you doing out there? And she'd go, just listening to the birds, Mama. Mm. And I thought about that, and I thought, she's been listening to the birds since day one. I was a nature permissive parent, and I validated her experience with birds always, from the cardinals in Connecticut that we left when we moved to California, to the towhees and the mockingbirds in our backyard. And she had been given that. And she now is 21, and she mentors other young children with bird behavior, bird sounds, just her love of birds, and is already introducing a new generation to them. And so again, it doesn't have to be one sweeping gesture of we're going outward bound, or we're taking our baby to go learn about birds in this moment. It can be walking outside your door and remembering the way you would say hello to your neighbor, your human neighbor. Say hello to the birds. Hey, birds. I'm forever having young children ask me, why do you talk to them? And, but then after doing it for a while, they start doing it too. Mm-hmm. So you can never underestimate the power of modeling from the moment a baby is born. PACEs, Janice, is protective and compensatory experiences of childhood. Meg, did you have any last words you wanted to add before we open it up to questions? And
yeah, well, just thinking about as we share this gift with children, we'll find ourselves nurtured as well. And as a parent who's been, living this global pandemic with young children, and many moments of social human isolation to give the gift of kinship with the natural world is something that can create this sense of belonging, and one that can transfer even when they're away from home, because many bird species exist across the US or even the world. So I'm just grateful for that perspective as well, that we're offering kids a coping strategy, a source of connection, a sense of belonging, a source of sensory input that actually helps organize and calm your nervous system. And then just the knowing that as the grownups in their lives will benefit from that too.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, lovely. I want to comment on something Brandy said over here in the chat. I'm loving reading all of these pieces that people are sharing. And, language is powerful. And I will just invite you to maybe shift. You said, and I hear this a lot because it's just, we don't know, but then when we know and we learn, then we can make little shifts that really make all the difference in the world. And I've seen lots of young toddlers try to chase birds. That's their excitement for the bird world. And so by shifting our language a little bit from don't do that, it's not nice, to you're so excited about the birds. And maybe the birds want you to keep a little more distance. So give them something really positive to do instead of saying, because babies don't do it because they want to be not nice. They do it because they're excited and they want to engage. So maybe just shift a little bit and help them understand how to engage in a safe way, so that they don't pull back on that excitement because they want to please you. That's one primary thing in their brains is, this is my caregiver and this person is my easiest route to keeping me alive. And so I have to please this person. So just in our language, notice your language as you're talking. And if you notice that it's got any negative undertone, just try shifting it a little bit. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too, because it's an opportunity to play with pace with kids, not the paces you were talking about, but just like how quickly or slowly we move our bodies. And I always love saying to kids, like, when we're really slow or we can sit still for a moment, sometimes that's when we can get the closest, or maybe it'll even come towards us. And that's like starting to build the foundation for impulse control, is being able to vary how quickly or slowly we're moving our bodies. So that's another opportunity to work with young kids on how to approach wildlife in general. But yeah, I wonder if we can get close if we go really slow.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that you brought that in, that regulation piece.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk in early childhood about self-regulation. And the reality is we don't have anything called self-regulation because we're always regulating in relationship to something outside of us. And the way that we get good at that is by practicing, starting with tiny little moments of just pause, wait. And that's how we build our ability to regulate ourselves. I want to just respond. Someone asked, what do I say when children ask me, why do I talk to birds? I also talk to flowers and plants and trees and things. So I'm that lady. But I say to them, I just look at them and I say, well, I say hello to you, don't I? And that usually makes them go, huh. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a lot more to say after that because they get it. Kids are amazing. They're still so close to nature, whereas we're, as adults, we get more and more removed often. Not always, but often.
Yeah. Can I piggyback on that really quick?
Yes.
Say, Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, writes about the language of animacy. And basically one of the things is like when we're referring to birds, to try using the word who instead of it. So just like granting this personhood to the living things around us, that's a small shift we've made, but I feel like it is another way to convey the respect and importance and relational approach towards birds. So I'll add that.
Yeah, nice, Meg. And Meg, I actually don't currently work with groups of young children anymore because I mostly train other people now, but Meg is still in the field every week working with young children and has lots of those little anecdotes that come quickly. So thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions here, and then someone's got their hand raised, I'm guessing with a question. Let's see. Telling kids that they'll see and hear birds if they're still and quiet. Yeah, and there's lots of ways to express that to kids. Stories are incredibly powerful. Songs are incredibly powerful ways of introducing kids how to sit and be quiet without even saying sit and be quiet. Because, you know, as soon as we say that, they want to wiggle. But we do something called sit spot, and it's often a group thing where all the kids will sit. Kids as young as 2.5 can do this, and maybe even earlier if they're on mom and dad's lap. In fact, Kira, my daughter, who I was telling you about the story today, that's how she started out, sitting with me at sunrise and listening to the dawn chorus when she was just a baby and toddler. So that's a good intro way. Let's see. Question from Sharon. Birding is generally an unstructured activity. Do you develop any kind of curriculum for schools? Yes, I do. And Meg is helping with that. It is disappointing because it seems like something that could be very easy to implement. And in fact, it is, when teachers understand how simple it can be and that it helps kids focus and pay attention on the back end. They're very excited to start employing some strategies in the classroom. And that's a whole nother webinar. Let's see, I tell kids, oh, okay, we did that one. Molly, do we have Priscilla? Priscilla had her hand raised. I'm not sure how to find out what her question is. Priscilla, maybe you could type it in the chat.
Yeah, that would be the best way.
Yeah. Braiding sweetgrass. Yeah, Robin Walkimmer, a native woman from your area, Meg.
Well, yeah, she did her graduate work right here in Madison at the Arboretum here. So yeah, and now she's in New York State.
Yeah.
I'm seeing questions about resources and activities, and I know we've created, or Kathleen put together a PDF that will be shared.
Oh yes, I did. I put together several PDFs that you see here, and we're going to give you a link to get those. Several PDFs. This one here is all links online, mostly YouTube's, of fantastic songs and rhymes for young children about birds. And so that's really fun. And there was one other question here. Oh, binoculars. So I don't recommend binoculars for toddlers because they're still trying to figure out the visual field and all of those things, and it can get confusing for them. Instead, well, what I suggest is to make pretend binoculars. You can use 2 toilet paper holders and tape them together, and then kids can look through those, and it doesn't kind of mess with that visual, the depth piece for them. And so it's a fun way for them to start learning how to do it without, while being developmentally appropriate. Meg, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Oh, good. Thanks, Molly, for putting that book up there. Magnifying glasses. Oh, yes, Jenica, that's a great one to start with toddlers. I used to carry just a whole set of little magnet, and the little ones are even cuter because they're good for tiny hands. They're super inexpensive, and they can really get a sense for each little thing that they're looking at. And that is a good way to start between the fake binoculars and those. It's a really great combination. Yeah, thanks, Jenica, for mentioning that. So I think, did we miss any questions, Molly? Did Priscilla end up asking hers? I don't see it here.
No, she said that she raised her hand accidentally, but I was wondering if, and she's welcome, Priscilla, you're welcome to put a question in the chat if you have one, but can you recap some of the 3 to 5 top practices you've been discussing today, the serve and return, the sit spot? Can you just go back over those and help us kind of wrap the bundle?
Sure. I have notes here in case I got a little distracted. So just remembering that babies learn to pay attention to what the adults in their environment are paying attention to. And so if you want a baby to pay attention to the birds, then you need to model that for them. So that's like the primary important piece. It can be that simple. Imitating bird sounds and playing with sound with a baby or a toddler. And to remember to try to create that sensory coherence that Meg, that we talked about with Meg and the Merlin and her daughter. It was like this beautiful multi-layered experience where sometimes we're excited to point out a bird or to make the sound of a bird, but we might forget to link them up together and to help them create a whole visual mind map. So those are a couple of pieces. And then the other pieces are, to use bird positive language in your everyday interactions, and to remember that it's not just one sweeping gesture, it's thousands of little interactions, thousands of moments across the young childhood from 0 to 5, 0 to 3. And it's all those little pieces that wire in to our children at the core that birds are not just nice to have, they're necessary. And, I think we have many examples of kids who've been raised that way and how much love they have for the birds. My adult children are very much, they don't, they talk about the birds as though they're their neighbors as well. So they don't see them as separate from themselves. And Lauren, thank you for asking. Yes, my book will be available. Well, right now there's actually a New Mother's Journal on Amazon. So it's your baby's first year, kind of beginning birding with your baby, and lots of little activities and things to do, and reflections for the new mother. And then my actual book with all the good meaty information and stories will be available end of August. And we have a link that people can go to. The link that we're going to give you, I did want to just say on the link that we're going to give you for the PDFs, you'll be able to download these PDFs. There's 3, 10 fun facts about your child's brain and birding. And then we had said that we would give 5 tips for motivating elementary age kids, because we know that people have multi-age kids. And then we have all these amazing links. And this is in the New Mother's Journal. That's what I downloaded that from, all these great links with songs. And we didn't even get time to do our chickadee song today, but
another time.
Yeah, but when you get that link, you'll see it's actually a link for my book, but at the very beginning, it says, get 10 fun facts. And for the next 3 days, I have all these PDFs under that. And then after 3 days, it's just going to be the 10 fun facts again. So if you want all 3 PDFs in the next 3 days, just go and download it from the link. And Molly, we'll put the link here again. Let's see, I think I have it here. And then you'll be sending out a follow-up email with that too?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I think there's time for a song.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
It might take an extra couple minutes for those people to stick around. But
all right. If you don't know this song, you're in for a treat. Maybe we'll end with this, right? Is that good?
That's good.
Okay. And I actually could put up the words for it. Should I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to put up the words for this.
And while you're doing that, I just want to say my daughter was 6 months old, waking up a lot in the middle of the night. And I lived in a very nature deprived area with no birds in Oakland. And except one mockingbird who in the middle of the night would go doo 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 and do this little like 3-note song. And I would always hear the mockingbird like, shh, shh, oh my God. But then like as she started to vocalize for the first time, one of her first phrases was, "Burr, burr, 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 burr." And I was like, I know that. Where do I know that from? And then in the middle of the night, I heard, "Dur, dur, 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 dur," and I was like, her first words were mockingbird.
My gosh.
That's so special. Okay,
That's incredible. I love that.
Here we go with here's the words. This is actually Meg singing the song. Oh, I hope it might end up playing.
Oh, that's funny.
Meg singing the song and teaching at our workshop. Okay, no, it didn't play, but it's a funny. Oh, red breast, oh. Here it is. Jumping down the tree. That's our robin redbreast crow flying high. You know what I'll do? I didn't put this on a PDF and upload it, but I'll add that to the PDFs with the link so that you all have the words to that song.
Nice.
Should I play it one more time?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yesterday, my 3-year-old made you play it 3 times in a row.
That's right. She did. That was so cute. She loved it. And that's one thing. She was upset when she came into the room and we were having our pre-meeting for this. And by the time she listened to it the first time through, she was smiling and going again. She was so happy.
Even this morning, she was in a very bad mood, and I took her outside and I said, "Oh, do you see that bird?" And it calmed her right down.
Yep, it's amazing. Red breast crow flying round, now the cat jumping down the tree. Chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Caw, 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 caw. Chickadee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee-dee-dee. All right, that's the chickadee song. I'll include that. Oh, it is, that video link too is on this PDF. So you can listen to it again if you're somebody like me who actually needs to listen to something more than once to get it. So, all right, and I think that wraps us up today.
Kathleen and Meg, thank you so much for being here, for the joy that you brought, for the inspiration, the heartfelt stories. It transformed me, even as someone who loves birds and loves introducing birds with my little ones. I'm even more deeply committed, like in my gut and soul. So I just want to say thank you for your leadership, for teaching us what we may not have known yet about the science and neurobiology of birding, and what it can do for us and our little ones. And may we all share the joy of birding with our next generations, and keep coming back to both of you as fabulous teachers in the field. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here.
Yeah, thanks Molly again for hosting in Audubon, and for all of you who love the birds and want to bring this to children. We need every hand on deck. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone.